Shadreck Chikoti. I'm a writer from Malawi. People call me a speculative fiction writer. I'm a publisher, and also I run a space in Malawi called the Story Club, which is basically a gathering of people that are enthusiastic about art and lovers and artists and all that.
I'm Acan Innocent Immaculate, and I'm a writer and currently.
Hope you can hear me. So I guess we can start by talking about what we, the speculative fiction description, or I've been thinking about it lately, and I've been thinking, in as much as we talk about speculative fiction as mostly sci-fi or fantasy or forward-looking fiction, isn't all fiction essentially speculative?
I released this novel, and it won some competition in Malawi. But everybody was saying, this is not Malawian enough. What are you writing about? Something that's happening in the future. So it's they couldn't identify with the piece, with the writing. And so speculative fiction, it's very hard to define it.
I think it's an interesting question. I think the question of genre is one that sort of haunts speculative fiction or science fiction, however we're defining this. What do I want to say about this? I think that there's a few writers who have actually spoken about this, and I think that they say some interesting things. And one of the it's actually a filmmaker, Erika Hughes. She's got a great interview about this, and was asked about what does it mean to you to be a science fiction writer. She sort of distances herself from that designation, especially around her film Pumsi. Okay, this is a piece of science fiction. She said, I didn't start out to read science fiction. I didn't start out to sort of intervene into the tradition of science fiction writing. That's not what I did. I had a story to tell, and I set that story in the future, and that story happened to sort of interact with issues that we might call speculative or science fiction, but that's not really the point of what she's doing. And I think that's really interesting. I don't think it's just a dodge. I don't think it's just a sort of way of getting around. I think it's actually it forces us to really sort of think about what we mean by this designation, speculative fiction or science fiction. And of course, Nadia Corfor also speaks about this, and I think what she's doing is really interesting because she's not subscribing to sort of traditional ideas about what science fiction definitions, right? She's happy to mix fantasy and science fiction and sort of blend these two imaginings of the world together, and I think that that's really actually productive, and that's where we should sort of be thinking, is at the intersection between these otherwise generic distinctions.
What I think speculative fiction is, I think speculative fiction is basically something that I can't find if I just walk down the street. And I don't think that it's writing about the impossible. I think it's writing about what could be. We're just thinking about what could be, the things that we can't see right now, that maybe we will see in the future. And I think it's a way of taking our minds to the limits of where they'll go. And yeah, that's basically what I think about it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because it works on how the imagination plays with reality or subjective reality. There was one point which, unfortunately, because Dil Mandela was supposed to be here for the panel, but he wasn't able to make it. But he did, while we were having preliminary discussions, he talked about how things like superstition, would those still be considered as categories of speculative fiction? And then even when we're looking at genre categories, why it is that speculative or sci-fi tends to be seen as something beneath maybe literary fiction, and is it necessarily that way? And who is the one who determines at where we measure speculative fiction and everything that comes
under? I would say I've heard the term magical realism being applied to a lot of speculative fiction. And I agree with Dillman. There are things that would be considered strange in other societies. For example, if I spoke about people called night dancers, it's a kind of affliction that people have that causes them to run around in the night, running around in the night, and there's so many rumors involved, some of them are cannibals and that kind of thing. And if you spoke to a person from Rakai, for example, it's a district towards the west of the country, these are things that they have experienced, and just because it sounds strange to us, should we put the label of speculative fiction in it?
I think still coming back to that, I think we're still grappling with definitions, grappling with how to define speculative fiction, how the impact of speculative fiction on the continent and all that. Even the thing, Afrofuturism. I just wanted to read something. Afrofuturism, this is the definition that I'm getting from the internet. It's a movement of literature, music, arts, etc., featuring futuristic or science fiction themes which incorporate elements of Black history and culture. And then I think Wikipedia says Afrofuturism is a cultural aesthetic philosophy of science and philosophy of history that explores the development intersection of African diaspora culture and with technology. So that alone to me is very limiting, which is why I do not want ever at all to be identified as an Afrofuturistic writer, because that is very limiting. Because it says that I have to incorporate, my writing has to incorporate, some elements of Black history, culture and all that. And I don't think that's what, African speculative fiction is all about. So like I say, we still struggle with, definitions. The powers that be still trying to define and control sort of, the way you write. That even African speculative fiction, speculative fiction has to fit a certain template. So that's my problem there. I consider myself as a writer. You just said, you just talked about this writer who set out to write this novel or this, this story that was set in the future, but he didn't or she didn't set out as an Afrofuturist. She was just writing. So I don't know, but I have problems where. The writing is being defined and being termed, authenticated. I don't know by which powers. So I think Nero Korafa talked about that as well. How that she doesn't consider herself as an Afrofuturist, other an African, futuristic writer or something. So yeah.
Just to say one few words, I think. The overarching idea, and I completely agree with you with this idea about the limitations of these definitions, I think is something we keep coming back to, and I completely agree with that. I think that fiction that has a sense of futurity, that is trying to articulate a sense of what the future means, and trying to sort of imagine that is inherently speculative, right, in that sense. I mean, we were talking about this last night, and I think speculative fiction, and especially the speculative fiction I see coming from the continent, what I'm interested in is the way in which it's thinking about the environment and the planet, and sort of ecological concerns. It seems to be something it's a sort of trend that's running through a lot of speculative fiction at the moment, because it seems that to think about the future is necessarily to think about the planet and the condition that the planet is in, and planetary change and these sorts of issues. So I think that more and more, I think that we'll see that speculative fiction is heading in that direction. And I think it's a pretty interesting direction. I think it's a very timely one.
So you say something about speculative fiction not being considered a more serious literary genre, and I think that stems from an unwillingness of some readers to decenter themselves from a story. just because a story is speaking about the experiences of an alien, for example, like Neji Okonkwo's work, it does not mean that you cannot relate with the experiences of the alien and use those experiences to evaluate your own life and your life choices and your decisions and the way you're living. In particular, I always reference Octavia Butler for her work. It gives me such a great insight into the human condition, and it's not necessarily always about human beings. So if we can learn to dissect ourselves from stories and still be able to pick lessons from the things that we read, just because they're not familiar doesn't mean they can't be used.
Yeah, that's actually interesting because most of the time when we read fiction, that is, there's this idea of building worlds, and it has to do a lot with setting and technology, and even the current events. It could be apocalypse, it could be a utopia, and where do you see the place of people in stories, in your own writing, in your own?
That's a good question. I think that oftentimes, and I think people like Mehdi who are pushing against this idea that speculative fiction is something new. And when he talks about this as well, there's a lot of writers are talking about this. So this is not something that's just come up in the last 5, 10, 15 years. That this is something that's been happening. Because as you say, it's about imagining worlds, right? And that's an inherent quality of fiction, right? I mean, we can talk about Amos Tutuola and television and ghosts and Dio Flagungwa, right? And I mean, these sort of imaginings of worlds are inherently speculative and trying to think about other spaces and other worlds in that way. So I don't know if that doesn't answer your question about people. I'm dodging that question, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know. I'll think about it.
So I think it doesn't matter, what kind of literature one is reading or one is writing. Humanity is the same. Problems and excitements and our fears, they're still the same in this century as well as in the next century, which is why we're able to identify and to enjoy. So I think the answer is, humanity is the same. As long as it's believable, as long as I can identify with it, it doesn't matter what kind of genre, what is working with.
I think limiting the scope of relatability of work to how believable it is can be a little problematic. Because if someone told me that they had seen a mermaid in Lamu, I wouldn't believe it, And if I were to read a story about the sufferings of the mermaid and all that, I would be confused and say, it's a fictional thing and it doesn't matter to me. I think the mere fact that speculative fiction is being written by human beings, the thoughts being transmitted through the work are still the thoughts of a human, and I think we should look at that. Despite the topic being addressed, we should still be able to see that we can learn something from it.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I'm also wondering how you talked about the reception of Malawi, it being something unusual. When you talked about night dancers, we have night runners, which is a single thing, and we have, for instance, like currently there's the book Freshwater, which is about Obanje, and I think about Ben Okri also writing about Obanje. So there's a sort of it's a thread that cuts across through time. So you find that with each generation there is a way that we imagine a particular phenomenon that could be either culturally relevant, but it speaks to an audience of today. Yeah.
I have wondered though, because in the general sense, speculative fiction is defined as fiction that has elements of the supernatural and futuristic. Supernatural and futuristic. So my question has been, is it possible to have speculative fiction which is set in the past? Utopias, dystopias. I don't know if that making sense, because the definition itself says supernatural and futuristic. And isn't that in itself also limiting? This is controllers.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with the idea that the more limits you place on this genre that it's going to do. And I think that it does have a lot of potential. And I don't see why not. Why can't we have speculative fiction set in the past? Why can't it also sort of? I mean, I think it's already doing that in some ways, right? I think that, you know, again, coming back to Mehdi, that she's already doing that in some ways. She's incorporating sort of elements of storytelling, elements of from sort of Nigerian cultural archives that are already there. And so in some ways that is working with history, right? Even though it's set in a moment that, you know, alien invasion, et cetera, that there's a sort of shuttling back and forth, I think, that's going on between the historical and the futuristic. I mean, right back to someone like Amos Tutuola, right? That the whole landscape of his painting is a historical one in some ways, right? Or it's a historically inflected one, yet it is incorporating these sort of elements that future thinking or outside thinking, for lack of a better way to
I think it really helps that the term speculative fiction exists, because I find that the subgenres, science fiction and fantasy and magical realism, they're set more restrictive, much more restrictive. Like, for example, how would you term Binti's, mediocre horror series, Binti? Is it science fiction, or is it magical realism, or is it fantasy? I think it's great that we have an umbrella term that can be used to describe all these things. And I think that there already exists the speculative fiction that's set in the past. For example, Octavia Butler's Big, it was set in the past and it kept coming up to the future. And I think that's part of the beauty of speculative fiction. You can write about anything, write about whether it's in the future or it's in the past or it's the present, and it's a really useful thing.
I don't think there's one way of looking at a book. I think those are things that come after so when you're writing something, you're not saying, we need to write a sci-fi book. I mean, you could set out to do that, but I don't think that's how it works in terms of the process. And maybe in terms of, if you're looking for a particular book to read, that's how I imagine categorization takes place. If I have a preference for something, I walk into a book. I want to be able to maybe find them at a central space. But you can also open up what a book's potentially, what a story's potentially. I mean, I've always argued that.
I agree with that. I don't think that genres should be used to limit the writers. I think genres basically to get the readers, but as a writer you should be able to write whatever you want to write, and then the reader will see what they want to see in it.
There's a way to think about science fiction and the futurity of science fiction. The future, right? The symbol of the future is just that it's symbolic. It's an allegory of the present, in some sense, right? So the thinking about the future in science fiction is always about, right? It's a writing of the present in some ways, and it's an allegorization of that. And so, in that sense, that's where I have some problems with sort of hard definitions about that it has to be futuristic. It does in some ways, but that future is also comments. It's a writing of the present in a different way.
For me personally, sometimes you find that with speculative fiction, there's either an inclination towards dystopia / apocalypse or utopia. What do you have to say about that?
So I think especially when it's futuristic, because it's a future. So the debate is it going to be a good future, utopia? Is it going to be a bad future? I think that's why the writing would lean toward those two lines. What did I want to say? One argument that I've seen over and over again is people, arguing whether a piece of futuristic writing is futuristic enough or not, and people have commented on almost every other. It's become a cliche. I read an article that talked about the Black Panther of it not being futuristic enough. And the question is, what is futuristic enough? We're not there yet. We don't know what. Exactly. And I think this is something that has become, like I said, a cliche from like an academic point of view, mostly. But the future is really, it can be anything. They're not there, and writers should not be limited, to what kind of future they, they have in mind as their vision and all that. So yeah, the future can either be good or bad. Coming back to your question.
And also has to do with how we look at development. We imagine development in terms of monumental things. Sometimes it's just like when I was talking about human condition, are we developing organically with the technology that's coming? Or are we just hankering after a certain idea, and mostly it's Western, of what technology is? Is it necessarily all these gadgets and nifty things, or is it also our own knowledge, how we're able to use that knowledge, whether it's from the past or the present, to imagine how it can help each other?
Maybe just to go back to the earlier question you asked about most speculative fiction, speculative fiction is usually dystopian or utopian. I think it's interesting that even when it's a utopian future, it ends up not being quite utopian. And I think speculative fiction, especially the futuristic fiction, is important in society because it's a reflection of current society and where we think we are headed. And the fact that there is so much dystopian fiction might point towards the fact that we don't believe we are doing well enough, that our future is going to be bright. And on the question of what we see as development, I do agree that right now we're chasing technology, not so much for what it can do for us, but just to have it and say, hey, look, we have these self-driving cars and whoop whoop, like I think, yes, development has to be multifaceted. It doesn't just have to be in a technological sense. And I think development should be you finding the version of yourself and your society that serves your needs best.
Yeah, I think a few things. One I think the question that you're raising, it's interesting to think about speculative fiction as a method, as a way of thinking about the world, right? So I do a writing workshop that's based on speculative fiction as method. And so what I do for participants is say, okay, you have to imagine a world. You have to imagine a world that is missing an element, right? So whether it's water or the air is unbreathable or something like this, right? There's an element that's missing. And so then you have to set your story in this world with a missing element. And how does the society that you base the story in deal with that missing element, right? And inherently, what is happening is speculative fiction there, but in terms of the actual writing, but as a process of thinking about the future, the conversations that come out of that are really, really interesting. It forces people to think about what new political configurations, new scientific configurations, new innovation. How do people deal with the fact that there's no water or that the air is toxic or something like that, right? So inherently, it's a way of forcing people to think about a world that is not that far away, not that futuristic, but actually the conversations lead back to the present and we start talking about policy changes, et cetera, et cetera. So as a method, I think speculative fiction is interesting not just as a mode of writing, but as a mode of analysis or a mode of critique.
In 2014, we had what I would call, for writers to write, stories that were set in the future in Africa 500 years from now, which was, of course, very ambitious. But what I saw in our anthology, which is, the title is Imagine Africa 500, is something that I'm also seeing across, I think, the African speculative fiction, that as we imagine the future, we have sort of become a protest movement, where we are trying to show our place in the world as Africans. And so as we imagine the future, we come with all this baggage of trying to position ourselves and talk to the world and show that we can, we are here, we can do it, we are people. And so that also, I think, is limiting in the way we, imagine the future. That we're not just imagining the future, we are imagining the future with all this baggage of trying to position ourselves and tell the world that we are here and, we can, with that kind of protest. I would like to see, some African speculative fiction which focuses on the future just as the future, the beauty of it without all this, without all these elements, without all this, baggage. I don't know if that makes sense.
We're always trying to find a place to identify from so that we can move forward. Why I found the thing about talking about the past being used to create speculative fiction. Because even the past, most of us didn't live at a certain time, but we're still able to try and imagine what events of that time influenced how it is that we ended up in the present day. What do you think of it?
So answering that, I've always wondered, for example, an American science fiction writer as compared to an African science fiction writer. Coming back to your question, but also coming back to what I say. An American science fiction writer is basically a writer who writes science fiction. An African science fiction writer is a writer who writes science fiction about Africa. I would be happy, or I would love to see, when we come to a point where, as we imagine the future, we don't have this baggage. We can just imagine the future as the future, even as we think of, our past.
I wonder, not to be overly optimistic, because that's never usually my position, but I wonder if that's changing a little bit. I wonder if the more sort of speculative fiction we see coming from, if that isn't changing in some ways. I think there's a certain way to think about futurity from the African continent, but also from the global South in some ways. Precisely because of the sort of rates of change. If you look at the sort of statistics, if you talk about at the end of the century, more people will live on the African than any other. Right? But there's a sense of growth and speed and velocity, I think, that's happening. And I wonder if that isn't sort of, if that distinction that you're setting up isn't shifting. It's purely, I'm just playing devil's advocate and wondering at this point.
I think at some point it's going to shift. I don't see that now, but I think at some point it's going to shift because you see how that. I would say, I talked about our speculative fiction being as a protest movement, but also it's highly political. It's highly political. Our speculative fiction because it has to have all these elements. I remember I had written a story that was set in Copenhagen in Denmark, and this was speculative fiction. And I sent it to an agent. It was accepted by the agent, and the agent sent it to a publisher, and the publisher had accepted it. But later on, they learned that I was from Malawi and Africa, and they were like, "Oh, this is a good story, but it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the authentic African speculative fiction or African literature." And as a publisher, would it be, I'll have difficulty selling it, which makes a lot of sense, because I'm a publisher, so I understand what that means. You have a brand, and it has, if you're publishing that, your literature, your work, has to fit that particular, brand. But that still came back to me to show how that our writing, even in speculative fiction, is still political and a protest movement. So I think at some point we're going to transcend that, but we haven't done that yet. Yeah.
I think it's an unfortunate reality that some of us belong to demographics that are inherently political. Like my existence as a woman, my existence as a black woman is political, whether I I want it to be or not. And so I think this transfers into the writing. Like my personal decision to center my Africanness, my Ugandanness in a speculative fiction story in a field where it hasn't been that way for the longest time is political. And I don't know, I don't think the onus is on us as writers to change that. I think it's now up to society to make a place where this is not the case, where a story about a Ugandan girl going into outer space and discovering an alien race is not surprising. And that's basically how I see it. I think right now and in the near future we aren't going to be able to disentangle ourselves from our history, from the fact that we come from histories of struggle and segregation and that kind of thing. And perhaps in the future, when society as a whole has righted itself and done the right thing, we will be able to see those, okay, not us, maybe our hosts will be able to see speculative fiction from African writers that won't be considered political merely coexist.